Hello, my name is India. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about some books that I've read this year and we are tier ranking them. I've done this video before where I ranked the first 20 books that I've read this year, and now we're going to rank the next 20 books that I've read this year. Yeah, I don't personally rate my books, so this is a fun way for me to check in on what I've been reading and how I'm feeling about it, if there are any equivalencies of like 5-star books for me that I've been reading. Eleanor's probably gonna come say hello right here, likely, but right now she's just hanging out. Hecate probably will not say hello. Those are my cats. Anyway, let's get started. First of all, we have our tiers. We have top tier, which is This Is My Personality Now. This is a book that I'm like so in love with. It is now my personality. Big recommend is underneath that. This is a book that if I'm like walking through a bookstore, I'm going to point out to people that I'm with and be like, hey, this is a really good book. You should read this. Yes is a book that I enjoyed. Not for me as a book that I didn't necessarily enjoy or was like just kind of meh. The last tier is It's a Book, which for me is just like, I'm kind of indifferent about the fact that I read it, which may or may not be a good thing. So we're starting off with Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kauai Strong Washburn. This follows our main character who, when he's a young boy, falls into the ocean and is like swept away and then is brought back in the jaws of sharks, and this sparks a bit of like, I don't know what this is, attention, a lot of attention towards him and his family, and the book follows him and his two siblings, his sister and his brother, as they make lives for themselves as they come into adulthood, as they move away or back to Hawaii, and just follows those different characters. I think the characterization was really strong in this book. I think that there was very distinct, well, I was about to say there's very distinct writing for each character, but I listened to the audiobook in which there were different narrators. So I think I might have a different point of view had I read this physically. I'm gonna put this in yes, though I think people would probably enjoy this widely. Next we have Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. This is a nonfiction book about tuberculosis and is really just John Green going on about how everything is tuberculosis. This also looks at the disparities between tuberculosis care depending on whether a person is living in a like Western first world country or a country where access to medical care is a little bit less prominent. So, you know, looking at this very curable disease that in many parts of the world the cure is not being administered or is not accessible to the people who need it. I thought this was pretty interesting. I listened to the audiobook and I enjoyed that John Green read the audiobook. I typically enjoy when authors read their own nonfiction. And this also was like, in some ways this is not a book for me because I get not necessarily squeamish, but pretty uncomfortable with medical talk and talk about illnesses and symptoms. So I'm gonna put this in yes because I think it was pretty well done, but in some ways it was not for me and I didn't have a like good reading experience the entire time, but that's not the book's fault. Next we have Stag Dance by Tori Peters. This is a novella and collection of short stories, which I did not know beforehand. I was listening to this as an audiobook and I was like, oh yeah, like when are these stories, like when are these characters all gonna meet each other? And then it was like, oh, these are different stories. The main story is about these men in Montana who I believe are working like in a legal timber situation. It's historical. and they're about to have a stag dance in which anyone who wants to pretend to be a lady for the dance can cut out a triangle of this fabric and like pin it to their crotch, and that is an invitation to be courted by the other men as a lady. And our main character is this like very gruff, highly masculine like man who has a big reputation of being like super strong and like ox-like, you might say. And he decides to wear the bush, which is like cutting out the triangle and pinning, anyway. And it is everyone's response to that and how his reputation changes. There are other stories in here that I think are really, really great. There's one about like a biological, like biochemical, there we go, biochemical plague that some folks decide to enact on humanity in response to / creating a world in which everyone is dependent on hormones. Like no one naturally produces gender hormones. And so everyone is dependent on them. I didn't explain that very well, but this is going in big recommend. I think it's really good. We have Blue Lily Lily Blue. I am going to rate this as alongside The Raven King. These both go in big recommend. They are the second or last 2 books in the Raven cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. And they follow Blue, who is prophesized to kill her true love, or like she's gonna kiss her true love and he will die. And it also follows 4 boys who she ends up hanging out with on the hunt for this Welsh king. I don't have any particular thoughts about Blue Lily Lily Blue and the Raven King. I just, like, the Raven cycle as a whole was just such a great reading experience. Like, if I was, like, tier ranking the series as a whole, it would go up into this is my personality now. But these 2 books are going to go into big recommend. I really enjoyed them. My favorite of the series is the Dream Thieves. But yes, I love the conversations about class. I love the conversations about destiny and the way that we relate to each other and the way that we depend on each other. Yeah, just really good. Then we have Nama by Sarah Blake. This is a retelling of Noah's Ark from the perspective of his wife, who in this book is named Nama. And this takes a look at her relationship with other people, particularly women. It's a very sexual book, and it also takes a look at her relationship with God and her differing opinions on, well, not differing opinions, her attitudes towards God in the midst of this flood. I thought this was really good. I think the characterization was really strong, and there were some very interesting scenes of, like, not only, like, how Nama is connecting with these women, but also this, like, underwater community she ends up finding. It's very magical. I'm gonna put this in big recommend. I think it was really good. We have In the Next Room, or The Vibrator Play by Sarah Rule. This is a play about the invention of vibrators, or that takes on the history of the invention of vibrators. If you're interested in that, I highly recommend Googling it. It's very interesting. There's a fun movie called Hysteria that is about this topic as well. But yeah, this follows a doctor who is treating women for hysteria and is doing so by the application of vibrators. And it is about some of his patients and his wife. And it's very fascinating. I would love to see this on stage because there's some interesting stage direction or like staging happening. I'm putting it in big recommend. Then we have Ariel by Sylvia Plath. I finally got around to this. I've had this book for like 10 years at least, and I've just been waiting for the right time to get to it, and I felt like this year was the right time. Ariel is Sylvia Plath's famous poetry collection. There were some poems in here that I enjoyed, but I think ultimately I didn't click with most of the poetry. That isn't to say that it's not good. I think my relationship to poetry is that sometimes I like it and sometimes I'm like, this was a poem. So I'm gonna put it in yes. Again, I think it's good, but for me, it, for the most part, wasn't like the most impactful. We have As Long as Grass Grows by Dina Gilio-Whitaker. This is about environmental justice and the role that Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities have played in it in the US, the time frame for this being from colonialism to Standing Rock. And this just takes a look at the different factors that are involved, not only with environmental justice and environmental racism, but also in terms of like how different Indigenous communities might deal with the factors of environmental racism. So looking at how land itself is politicized, both from from the perspective of like it being stolen and who has a right to the land, but also for like who is caring for the land, who has the right to care for the land, who has the right to make decisions about the land. That type of stuff is being talked about. I thought this was really good. It was pretty dense, so I opted to listen to the audiobook. And yeah, I would recommend it if you are interested in environmental justice, because I think it tells necessary stories about that work. So I'm gonna, That said, it still wasn't like my favorite nonfiction, so I'm gonna put it in yes, even though I do recommend it. We have A Hunger Like No Other by Cressley Cole. I picked this up on the, based on the recommendation list of Spicy Cats Reads, list of books about werewolves, because I'm trying to see what types of monsters I like to read about. I love some monster romance, but we're like dipping our toes into the werewolf genre and the vampire genre with this. So this is about, before I get into what it's about, I will repeat the disclaimer that Kitty gives, which is that this is very problematic, especially in terms of the conversation of consent. Like very not great. And that's how it is. Now what it's about is about this young vampire who's just walking through Paris because she's trying to find the origins of her father or something and figure out him, because she's also part Valkyrie. What are Valkyries? I don't fully understand. Anyway, she's vampire Valkyrie, and suddenly she gets tackled by this werewolf guy who up until recently has been trapped for centuries in this vampire den, being burned alive and then, you know, like reincarnated because he can't die, and just imprisoned in this fire pit hell, essentially. And he has found his mate, and she's like, who are you? And questionable things ensue. Despite the questionable things, I had a good time reading this. And I'm not gonna investigate that any further because I don't want to. Well, because I could, but I want to enjoy what I enjoyed while recognizing the things that are like not great. So I'm gonna put this in yes. I wouldn't recommend it, but I enjoyed myself. Ooh, okay. Not Good for Maidens by Tori Bovalino. This is a retelling of The Goblin Market in a YA horror setting. This has two timelines, one of which is about these two sisters who are witches in New York, and their coven is tasked with dealing with the Goblin Market. The Goblin Market is based on Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, which is this market of goblins who sell delicious fruit. But if you eat the fruit, you are kind of cursed to continue to go back to the Goblin Market, which is what they want, so that they can like kidnap you and take you and do awful things. Anyway, one of the timelines is about these sisters who are witches. They are tasked with taking care of the Goblin Market in terms of taking care of and helping to heal people who go into the Goblin Market and come out injured. And then also they are just there to kind of like appease what's going on a little bit. Appease makes it sound like they're not very like badass. They're pretty badass witches. They're like doing very important work. Anyway, that first timeline is about them being young, and particularly one of them who is really curious about the Goblin Market and maybe starts to fall for a goblin. The other timeline is about one of their daughters and one of their younger sisters. They're about the same age. And the sister gets taken by the Goblin Market, and she calls up the daughter, Lou. She calls up Lou and she's like, I'm taken by the Goblin Market. And then there's a goblin who's like, we know where you are. You're gonna come and get her. Anyway, they go on this adventure quest to save the person who has been taken. I really liked this. I really liked the audiobook. I really liked this story. I think that like YA creepy horror is where I need to delve into next. I'm very curious about it because it's like scary and creepy, but not too scary and not too creepy. So I'm gonna put it in big recommend. The Yellow Jessamine by Caitlin Starling. I have been dying to read Caitlin Starling, and I'm glad that I started with this. The Yellow Jessamine is historical fiction about this woman who is the owner of this trading company, and one of her ships comes back, and there's someone who is very sick on this ship, but they're sick in a really weird way where their eyes kind of glass over, and it's like they're in a coma, and they don't really know what's going on. The other thing with this main character is that she is also the town like underground apothecary for apothecary medic person for the women in the town who have varying ailments, and they will come to her and she will help them with those ailments that maybe they might not get help with from a traditional doctor. Anyway, there's this mysterious illness that's happening and this mysterious thing that's going on with the trade, and there's also this like, not mutiny, what's the word? Siege that's like on the horizon of this town. Very creepy, a little bit of like botanical horror going on. I really liked this, and I can't wait to read more of Caitlin Starling's works. So I'm going to put this in big recommend. Swing Time by Zadie Smith. This is the first Zadie Smith that I've read. This follows two young girls who meet at dance class and develop a love for dance, and one of the girls develops an obsession with the other. And then we also get an additional timeline with our main character who is obsessed with this other girl. And when she's older, she works as a like assistant to this Madonna type figure who is building a school for women, a school for girls in an African country. I don't know if it's particularly expressed which country this school is being built in, but it's very performative in a lot of ways. I preferred the timeline of the girls as young girls, and looking at their relationship, looking at their obsession with dance, looking at how they interact with each other. That was a lot more fascinating to me and more interesting and compelling than the other timeline that we follow. I didn't really care so much about them as adults And that's kind of what brought the story down for me. And so I'm gonna put it in yes, because I could see that it was really good writing. I could see that it was really good storytelling as well. But a good chunk of it I really just wasn't that into. We have Dates Volume 3, which is a queer historical fiction, which is a collection of queer historical short stories, all in comic form, or like illustrated form. Well, not all of them. There are some written stories, which is a little confusing to me. I would have preferred if they were all illustrated comics. This is a book. I'm just gonna put it in there. It's a book. I wanted to finish out this series of graphic novel collections. But yeah, it was just okay for me. I didn't love the illustration style of a lot of the stories. I felt like they were kind of basic in their happily ever afters, which is the whole concept of the anthology, is that they're historical queer stories where there is a happily ever after. And I think that's very good to have, but for me, I just felt like it was a little simplistic. And am liking some other comic anthology collections that are doing similar things, but just a little differently. Next, we have Margaret and the Mystery of the Missing Body by Megan Milks. This is the story of Margaret, who's really struggling with being a teenager, being in high school, feeling like she needs to grow up, and feeling like her friends are growing up faster and more easily than she is. She had this friend group in middle school and elementary school. I mean, I assume it's elementary school as well, but maybe just middle school. That was like girls can solve anything. It was like girl detectives, like this babysitters club detective group that were solving these kind of magical mysteries around the town. And there was a sense of control in that, and there was a sense of community in that. And Margaret has really lost that as her friends are starting to grow up and have different interests and not want to be part of this detective group anymore. The other key thing about this book is that Margaret struggles with an eating disorder, which lands her in a treatment facility. And while she's in that facility, she really has to confront different things about bodies and about control and about self by going into bodies. And I'll leave it at that. I really liked this book. I really liked what it did. I did not like it as much as Slug. I need to reread Slug. Loved Slug. So I'm going to put this in big recommend. But Not Too Bold by Hache Pueyo. This is a queer historical horror romance, and I think it was doing a little too much. This is about this house that is owned and operated by this spider woman, and everyone who works there has their own spiders, and the spider woman brings in brides, and the brides go up to the attic and they don't come back down. And there's a woman in charge of facilitating these marriages that don't end up going so well. But that woman ends up being eaten by the spider woman. And it is our main character's job to step in and take on that role of facilitating these like marriages and making sure the spider woman gets her food and like all of that. And it's about this relationship that is formed and also this mystery of like this theft that happened. Someone stole something from the spider woman, and she's like, okay, you either need, talking to the main character, you either need to figure out what happened or I'm gonna eat you. So this was just doing a lot, and I don't think I ended up liking it very much. I think it just wasn't for me. So I'm putting it in not for me. Glyph by Ali Smith. This is a very interesting and confusing book for me because I think it has a lot of very compelling and relevant themes. I just wasn't super into it. So Glyph follows two sisters who are kind of forced out of their family home because their mom has disappeared and they can't figure out where their mom is, and there's like stepbrother or something is like, I'm gonna figure it out, but you guys have to go to this place and be safe. And it's about that, and it's also about like who belongs in different places, who's allowed to be in different places. There's a lot of like political messaging that I think was really important, but I think I also just didn't get very well. So while I love Ali Smith, this was not for me. I also listened to the audiobook, and I think that was one of my mistakes. I'm not gonna listen to Ali Smith's books on audio anymore. But yeah, this just wasn't for me. Take a hint, Dani Brown. This is a romance. It's the second in the Brown Sisters series. This follows Dani, who is a professor of feminist literature, and also Zafir, who is a security guard in the building that she works in. So what happens is there's a fire drill, and Dani doesn't know about this fire drill, and she gets stuck in the elevator. Zafir notices that Dani is not out with everyone else, where like the fire drill people need to convene. And so he like runs into the building, pries open the elevator, and then carries her outside, which sparks this like huge array of attention from people. Everyone's got their phones out. They're like, oh my god, couple goals. And so suddenly there's this like huge internet thing of like I forget what the hashtag is, but it was funny. So there's this huge hashtag based on this event that happens. And so Dani and Zafir are like, okay, what if we pretend to date? Like, they think we're dating. What if we pretend to do it? Because then this will draw attention to Zafir's like youth sports programming that he does. And I forget what Dani gets out of it. Sorry, that was my cat. I forget what Dani gets out of it. But oh no, yeah, Dani's like, I need to have sex with someone. And so she thinks it'll lead to that. And anyway, so cute, so sweet. I definitely liked this a little bit more than I definitely liked this a bit more than Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is the first book in Talia Hibbert's series. But I think that's just like circumstantial of like when I read this that I liked it. So this is going in big recommend. Honestly, yeah. If They Come for Us in the Mornings, Voices of Resistance by Angela Y. Davis. This is a book about prison abolition, obviously, if you know who Angela Y. Davis is. And this talks about her imprisonment her time in the like women's detention facility in New York, and also varying Black or people of color who were wrongfully imprisoned or who were political prisoners in the US. I thought this was incredibly accessible. I was really nervous to read this because I thought it was going to be way over my head, and it wasn't. I think this was a really great spot for me to re-enter the conversation about prison abolition and political prisoners in the US. And I think it was just really great to be reading. So I'm going to put this in big recommend. I think if you haven't read Angela Y. Davis, it's definitely I felt like it was a good place to start, even though I thought that I was going to start with Women, Race, and Class. But yeah, I was pretty happy to start with this one. Lastly, we have The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert. This is my first Katie Robert, and I wanted to read some of her monster romance because I love some monster romance. This is about our main character who makes a deal with a demon to commit 7 years of service to his world in exchange for for her, freedom from her current situation, which is a relationship with an abusive partner. So she's escaping that and doesn't know that she's going to be auctioned off to the leaders of these monster places. These they're not called kingdoms, what are they called? Territories. These monster territories. And our main character ends up with the dragon. And so she becomes the dragon's bride, as the title suggests. And yeah, it's honestly fairly basic. I thought it was pretty, it like hit stuff on the nose. It was pretty obvious in a lot of places. I've preferred some other monster romance that I've read, but I had a good time with this one. So I'm gonna put it in yes. We're all done. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you've been reading this year, what you've been liking. I'm a little sad that I don't have any, this is my personality now, books in this this round, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I will see you when I see you.